In this video, I'm going to closely analyze a simple yet popular argument that's frequently put forth by Ray Comfort, but I've also heard it offered by Kent Hovind. So, to dive right in, put simply, if you see a painting, then you know there must be a painter. If you see a building, then you know there must be a builder. So, when you see creation, then you know there must be a creator. Now, upon first glance, this argument should have a simplistic, reasonable feel to it. Before moving forward into analyzing the logical structure of this argument, I'd like to go over that aspect first. Let's start with a little experiment. Say you went to a store and purchased a baseball bat and a ball, and the total cost of both items together was $110. If the cost of the baseball bat is exactly $100 more than the cost of the baseball, how much did the baseball cost? If you wish, feel free to pause the video, but I'll give you a few seconds anyway. Alright, now if you're like most people, the answer that should have popped in your head immediately is $10. And it's quite likely that if you didn't go back and consciously think it over, that was the answer you submitted. But in actuality, this is incorrect. And I'm sure given the circumstances, you're not the least bit surprised by this. Now, just because we can, let's delve into the mathematics and see if we can find the proper answer. Because I'm sure anyone watching this video has just been waiting for the opportunity to crunch out some algebra. Let's first establish our variables as x is the cost of the ball and y is the cost of the bat. Now from the information we've given, we can conclude two things. X plus y equals 110, which is the cost of both items, and y equals x plus 100, which is the cost of the ball plus 100. We'll start from the first equation here. In the second equation, since y equals x plus 100, that means we can substitute x plus 100 for y using basic algebra. Then we can just simplify that to 2x plus 100 equals 110. From there, we just have to do a little work to isolate the variable x. Firstly, subtracting 100 from both sides, then dividing each side by 2, and we end up with x equals 5, which leaves us with the correct answer. The baseball costs $5. So why is it that we find $10 to be such an appealing answer? An explanation to this pertains to the two different processes of thought involved in decision making. Cognitive theory of decision making supports that we have intuitive thinking, which is also known as fast thinking, and analytical thinking, which is also known as slow thinking. Conclusions reached through intuitive thinking are what your brain finds immediately appealing and constitute gut reactions, while conclusions derived from analytical thinking are arrived at through logic and reasoning. For the most part, people rely on intuitive thinking to navigate through everyday life and to make sense of things they encounter. So when the mind encounters a satisfactory conclusion, such as $10 in this case, it's not uncommon for a person to be satisfied with that answer and to not think about it any further. When we couple this with a natural human drive to seek out and identify and learn patterns in the world, we can see why this argument of Ray's is so appealing, at least on the surface. So let's dig a little deeper, shall we? So first, let's put this in a logical format we can better analyze. We'll start with the top statement as premise 1. P, representing painting, has property x. Property x being the result of a deliberate process. I'll come back to this, but this is the main point that this statement is intended to make. So we'll do the same with the second statement as premise 2. B, which represents building, has property x. And we'll finish up with the third statement. Conclusion, C, representing creation, has property x. Now, looking at these premises in the conclusion, you can see that there's no logical connection between the two. A pattern is there, but there's no explicit connection between them. This is what is called an argument from analogy. This argument tries to make all of its points by drawing analogies and letting you make the connection. So based on the nature and the aim of this argument, we can draw an implicit premises from this, which would be premise 3, C is like P and B, and modifying the conclusion to read, therefore, C also has property X. So now that we've identified the logic behind this argument from analogy, we can clearly see that it relies on a pattern to make the conclusion appealing. In fact, we can expose this by just replacing the word creation with the word universe. You could just read it out loud again to yourself to see. From a psychological standpoint, this argument attempts to invoke what is referred to as the availability heuristic, which is a common quick strategy for making judgments about the likelihood of occurrence. Typically, the individual bases these judgments on the salience of similar events held in memory about the particular type of event. The quicker something springs to mind about an event, the more likely it is judged to be. This is an aspect of our intuitive thinking, as mentioned before. And to illustrate what this means, casinos intentionally try to take advantage of this natural form of thinking. Picture a slot machine, and what happens when you win? All the lights go off and all kinds of noises sound. Well, quite the opposite happens when you lose. Everything remains quiet and the game is moved along. This is intentional because now the memories of you winning tend to be more lasting and permanent because they're associated with that vivid stimulus. On the other hand, when you lose, nothing happens, so the chances of forming lasting memories are significantly less. So when considering doing this again in the future, the proportion of memories you have winning versus those you have losing will be disproportionate to the probabilities of reality, thus inflating your perspective of the chances of winning in order to get you to play again. Now the argument we're discussing takes advantage of this by presenting two acceptable examples of this pattern of thought, which makes these more available and they act as a springboard for the mind to engage in this manner of shortcut thinking. Alright, so let's analyze the structure of this argument. We'll start specifically with the wording. Looking at the term creation that's used in the conclusion, we've seen that using another word compromises the appeal of this argument. So what is technically wrong with using the word creation? Well, in thinking about what a creation is the intended result of a creative process. And a process is a series of actions or steps undertaken in order to achieve an intended result, which then necessitates that there must be something that undertook that process, i.e. a creator. So following this line of logical reasoning, we can see that the term creation already has the implication of a creator built into it. Therefore, this argument commits the logical fallacy known as begging the question, which is a form of circular reasoning. Put simply, begging the question means that the conclusion of an argument is already being assumed by the premises of that argument. Another simple example of this logical fallacy would be to claim that Bob never lies because Bob said so. By using Bob's own statement to support the conclusion, I'm already assuming he's necessarily telling the truth, when in reality, if he was lying to me right there, I could have come to the same conclusion. Alright, and we're not done yet. So this argument is definitely trying to push the notion that nothing begins to exist without being created. Looking at the first two examples, a painting and a building, those don't really fall into the same notion of creation. In actuality, a painting and a building aren't really created from nothing. They're rearrangements of pre-existing matter, from painting supplies or from building materials, reshaped through the deliberate expenditure of energy. Now in regards to creation, as it's claimed here, that would constitute a different kind of creation, more of a true creation, especially if that's intended to be ex nihilo, which means created from nothing. Now, since this argument is using two different notions of the word creation as demonstrated here, this argument also commits the fallacy of equivocation, which is basically using two different definitions for the same word within an argument. An amusing example of an equivocation fallacy that I've heard: Premise 1, all stars are exploding balls of gas. Premise 2, Miley Cyrus is a star. Conclusion, Miley Cyrus is an exploding ball of gas. So this renders this argument from analogy guilty of two logical fallacies, rendering the conclusion unsupported. If you haven't already, please take a look at my previous video, What is a Logical Fallacy?, to ensure it's clear what it means when an argument commits a logical fallacy. Now, the most common response I've received in response to the rebuttal of this argument is that something cannot come from nothing, or that something cannot create itself. And this strongly resembles the basis of the Kalam cosmological argument, so I suggest searching YouTube for some rebuttals to this argument. The YouTuber Tony Reed has a video series, How Creationism Taught Me Real Science, in which he has a video that addresses the Kalam cosmological argument and touches upon the points I just mentioned. So I'll conclude this video with a strong recommendation to check out his series. I'll link it below, and thank you for watching.